Pranams at the lotus feet of Bhagavan Baba. Sairam to one and all. It's my pleasant duty to introduce Dr. Sashikaran, the former director of NIN ICMR, Hyderabad. Sir is a pathologist by training and has carried out research in the areas of nutrition, food safety, and toxicology for 30 years. Sir has over 120 publications and 3 book chapters. Sir has developed guidelines for probiotics in foods, guidelines for GM food safety, guidelines for biosimilar drugs, recommended dietary allowances and dietary guidelines. Sir served as director NIN Hyderabad from 2006 to 2012. Sir is a fellow of National Academy of Medical Sciences, fellow of the International Medical Scientists Academy, fellow of AP and Telangana Academies of Sciences, and the past president of the Nutrition Society of India. Sir is a public trustee of ILSI India and member of the governing body of Nutrition Foundation India. Sir is also a member of Advisory Council on Science Coca-Cola India and member of Scientific Advisory Committee Gut Microbiota and Probiotic Science Foundation. I welcome you, sir, to deliver your precious talk for which we are all waiting for. Please join us, sir, in this e-conference.
The nutrition and immune function is being discussed quite a bit these days in the relevance of this COVID-19 pandemic. And so today's talk will be based on what is the relevance between nutrition and the immune function in the present day's scenario. Now, this COVID pandemic has turned out to be a wake-up call for the entire humanity. And we are still learning almost on a day-to-day basis. Now, there are a lot of issues relating to both the clinical as well as the public health aspects of this COVID infection and the relevance to nutrition. The risk of acquiring COVID infection is actually unrelated to the nutritional status. It depends on the exposure to a droplet with the live virus from another source, which is again an individual. Contaminated surfaces, especially from food sources, are less likely. And the close proximity of an individual increases the risk, and in closed environments with poor ventilation. And in relationship to nutritional status, there has been a study which was published by Popkin very recently, which showed that those people who are obese, have a 46% greater risk of contracting this infection. So it is strangely not the undernourished, but is the overnourished who are more vulnerable, unless of course the elderly. And among those who get the infection, those who are more likely to suffer are those who are obese, who have diabetes, hypertension, or any of the other chronic comorbid conditions. Apart from elderly patients who have less of muscle mass and more of body fat. Now, the question always asked is there any relationship between undernutrition and immunity? There have been a few studies which came in from China, which showed that some of the patients who got admitted had low serum albumin levels, but low serum albumin levels are really not a good predictor of undernutrition under disease conditions. Lymphopenia, or low level of lymphocytes, is one more characteristic, but this again is more a characteristic of the disease than that of the nutritional status. There's just been one study which showed that patients had low pre-albumin levels, which showed that they had a lower level of nutritional status. But overall, it appears that this disease doesn't seem to target the undernourished, nor are the undernourished more vulnerable. The nutritional status, as a statement made in this publication, appears a relevant factor influencing the outcome of patients with COVID-19. but not much information emerged so far on the impact of early nutritional support in pre-ICU patients with COVID-19. So there's been no evidence to show that if you give nutritional support to these patients during the early phases of disease, you can prevent or reduce the morbidity. Until date, we don't have that kind of information. Then the question is, will a good immune function mechanism prevent us from a viral infection? This is not going to happen because this is a new virus, and the only thing which could probably prevent us is, apart from taking the various preventive care measures, is if we have an effective vaccine. A good immune function may not prevent the virus, but it possibly could get eliminated in an individual who's healthier, unlike a malnourished individual, by which I mean even those who are overweight and obese. A good immune function probably makes a difference between survival and death in the elderly. The components of the immune system, if you were to recall, is one is what's called the innate, is the first response. This is generally not a specific response. It could occur due to any infection. It's only the later adaptive immunity which is more specific to the virus. And such an immune response could be poor in the elderly because of a poorer immune function. The components of an adaptive immunity are very specific to the pathogen, and there are several cells which are involved. Among them are the T cell subcategories and a whole complex array of other cells, and their interaction with one another constitutes what is called as the adaptive immunity. This results in the production of a whole lot of protein molecules which create inflammation, what is called as the pro-inflammatory cytokines, which like interferon gamma and the various interleukins like interleukin 2. But in any immune response, there is also a regulatory mechanism, that is like a switch, which switches off the immune response once the invading organism has been controlled. And these act through the T regulatory cells, and the cytokines like IL-10, IL-12 are the ones which sort of reduce the immune response, and there seems to be a flaw in this mechanism. It appears that the immune response is going beyond what it should and causing damage to the organs. Now, what is the effect of aging on immune function? We should remember that elderly people are not immunodeficient. The inefficient response to new or even old antigen is probably the cause rather than immunodeficiency. And the elderly also respond poorly to vaccines. So when we actually have a vaccine, we should make sure that in the clinical trials or in the post-marketing trials, we should check whether the vaccine is working equally efficiently in the obese as well as the elderly, because they are the most vulnerable population than the generally healthier younger population. The T cells and B cell numbers are also lower in the elderly population. We have two kinds of white cells. One is the myeloid cells, which are like the neutrophils, and the others are the lymphoid cells. In this particular disease, there is a clear disparity between the actual numbers of these myeloid versus the lymphoid cells. The myeloid cells, which are the neutrophils, are far outnumber the lymphoid cells. And in fact, the ratio is now considered as a predictor of prognosis. So the myeloid cells far exceed the lymphoid cells. In fact, there are some studies which showed by inhibiting the production of myeloid cells, they have been able to pull through some of the seriously ill patients. Now, the effect of aging on immune function could be due to a variety of reasons. One of them, of course, is nutrition. The other is because the thymus gland, which normally produces the T cells, naturally undergoes atrophy. And the obese patients, the adipocytes or the fat cells also infiltrate the thymus, and this may be contributing to the decreased number of T cells in the elderly obese patients. The cytokines, which are normally produced by the T cells, can also be produced by the fat cells. And this again is considered as one of the reasons for the high amount of these inflammatory cytokines, which are causing all the damage, being much more in the fatter people than the leaner persons. The elderly also have a problem that they have a deficiency of growth hormone and the insulin-like growth factor, which in turn also reduce the amount of lymphocyte production. which probably is one of the contributing factors in the elderly to have more of the myeloid cells than the lymphocytes. There was an interesting study which showed that calorie restriction could reverse this, which means if we were to reduce calories in an intermittent manner, this stimulates growth hormone production, also stimulates IGF-1, which in turn will stimulate the production of lymphocytes, which are the immune cells. It is quite possible that our traditional belief of intermittent fasting actually is a way of immune stimulation. Aging and higher inflammation is also coined as what's called inflammaging, which is accumulation of a lot of inflammatory molecules in the tissues associated with aging. And the elderly who have comorbid conditions also seem to express a particular receptor called the angiotensin converting enzyme receptor 2 on the cells through which the coronavirus is binding and entering into the cells. And it's found that elderly are expressing more of these receptors, which is probably why they are more vulnerable. The chronic immune stimulation, that is lifelong, there is a low level of inflammation occurring in our body. Such a phenomenon is seen in obese and diabetics and those who have insulin resistance, those who have higher intake of carbohydrates and refined sugars, higher saturated fat intake, and in micronutrient deficiencies. And this could probably be mitigated or managed by higher intake of fruits and vegetables. And even spices are known to have anti-inflammatory kind of an action. And as I already mentioned, calorie restriction itself can enable reducing the chronic inflammation. So this was a study which showed that individuals with obesity are more prone to the disease of COVID-19, the paper of Barry Popkin. They did a systematic review of 75 studies, and they used it for conduct a meta-analysis, and they found that the risk of actually acquiring the disease was greater among the obese individuals by 46%. The risk of getting hospitalized was higher to the extent of 113% among the fatter people compared to the leaner ones. The risk of getting into ICU was 74% if the individual is obese or overweight. And the chances of dying was 48% higher in people who have obesity and other comorbid conditions like diabetes. There are many mechanisms which are jointly explain this, some of which I already mentioned. But our major concern now is that whether vaccines would work effectively in obese people or not. Another important player in our body's immunity is the gut microbiome. It is already known even in Ayurveda that if a person has got a good digestion, he is likely to be more healthier than the one who does not. And for which we now have an explanation that our gut has got a whole lot of bacteria which are beneficial to us. And they are directly involved in communicating with the gut immune cells and managing immune tolerance. And people who take high amount of energy with low fiber diets have got very poor kind of a gut microbiota, because of which there is a breach in the intestinal mucous membrane, and several gram-negative bacterial cell wall polysaccharides get through the intestine and come in contact with the immune cells, which in turn produce the inflammatory cytokines, and which probably is contributing to the severity of the disease right now. The beneficial effects of prebiotics and even fermented milk products are now cannot be re-emphasized. Omega-3 fatty acids are also known to improve the gut microbial population and also help in the immune function. Cytokine storm is a common term which is being used now, which shows the amount of pro-inflammatory cytokines being produced in the severe stages of COVID disease. And this is now found to be more severe in individuals who already have a baseline chronic inflammation. The hypothesis is that the viral genes switch or trigger on or further upgrade the action of the genes which are already triggered due to chronic inflammation in these individuals. Now, are there any nutrients which are really involved in immune functions? We hear a lot of products being marketed stating that they are immune stimulants. An adequate and good quality protein diet definitely contributes to better immunity. Some amino acids which are critical to immunity, like arginine and glutamine, are produced in the body itself. Zinc, selenium, vitamin A all have the role in immune cell proliferation, but supplementing them, whether it will actually help us control this outcome of this viral infection, is still not very clear. Vitamin D receptors are present on all immune cells, and it is therefore an important nutrient. And most of us are vitamin D deficiency are deficient, and it is quite likely that if we could improve our vitamin D status, we could probably reduce the morbidity, if not protect us from this infection. Other nutrients like vitamin C and the entire B complex range are some way or the other involved in the immune function. But it is rather better to source these vitamins through our natural diet than by taking supplements. We really have no evidence that supplements do any magic. Now, coming to spices and several bioactive traditional ingredients which are always there in our Indian diet, turmeric is an anti-inflammatory action. It acts through the NF-kappa B and STAT3 pathways. Phytochemicals present in onions have anti-inflammatory as well as immune-boosting potential. Garlic or allicin, the allicin in the garlic inhibits the secretion of several cytokines. Ginger is antibacterial and anti-inflammatory and antioxidant. Cardamom is rich in magnesium and zinc, both are involved in immune function. Capsaicin, which is present in chili peppers, benefits vascular function. And if you notice that many of the pathologies associated with the COVID-19 infection are related to deranged vascular function. Cinnamon is a free radical quencher. Cumin or jeera-based diets are known to reduce our energy requirements and reduce the calorie intakes. Tea catechins have got antiviral properties. Milk is a very good nutrient which has got several immunomodulatory proteins. You can see that whey, GMP, milk IgG, lactoperoxidase, lactoferrin all have got their influence on the T lymphocyte proliferation and lymphocyte action, and also on cytokine release. So it has traditionally been known that during any kind of an infection, milk has been considered as the safest food. Probably the wisdom of our ancestors is seen through the science, which clearly shows that milk has got several immune modulating benefits. So how do we manage the diets for better immune function? It's a time for most people to shift to traditional and conventional diets based on all these benefits. Intermittent fasting probably has a benefit in reducing energy intakes and stimulating immune function. Avoid all so-called junk foods which are high fat, salt, and sugar containing, which will reduce the chronic inflammation, and replace it with plenty of vegetables and fruits. People should control their existing metabolic problems very meticulously. If they have been lax in managing their diabetes, it is time to make it very rigid now, at least to reduce the morbidity, even if one were to be affected by the viral infection. Exercise is an important immune stimulus and should be done within the limitations of our movement and restrictions. Elderly alone may require micronutrient supplements if their food intakes are low. Water-soluble vitamins are okay to take even if they are in mega doses because they get excreted, but fat-soluble vitamins has to be taken with care because excessive nutrients can even do more harm. Avoid stress because stress itself is an immune suppressant. And ensure adequate sleep. Sleep has become an important factor in many of the clinical management of these patients. They found that patients who have sleep disorders do very poorly when they do actually get this infection. So those are the clinical relationship between nutrition and COVID-19, but what are the public health related aspects, which was, in fact, Dr. Manjula just now mentioned quite a bit of it in the US context. Now, the existing food and nutrition insecurity is that about 820 million people are chronically insecure. By the end of this year, 135 million will be at crisis levels. There could be another 47 million more stunted children added. This information has come from the UN document or policy brief on COVID-19. The children missing school meals, which was already mentioned, will be around huge amount of 368 million the worldwide, and including in India. And the pandemic will push 49 million people to extreme poverty by the end of 2020. It is calculated by the World Bank that every 1% fall in a country's GDP will add about 500,000 more stunted children. The way the pandemic will be handled in terms of the nutrient intakes would differ whether they belong to the upper socioeconomic or the lower socioeconomic group. The upper socioeconomic group will access a variety of food because they can afford to buy and get it from any source. And they are likely to prefer easy to cook and ready to cook or ready to eat foods, staying in their homes and working from homes. So they are likely to consume more of the junk foods. Working from home means greater amount of snacking. There'll also be decreased physical activity. And when people are under stress, they eat the wrong kind of foods, and there's also binge eating and higher alcohol intakes. However, low socioeconomic group, it's a question of their livelihoods. They lost their income, they lost their jobs. But they would also go for unhealthy foods which are cheaper, which Dr. Manjula also mentioned just a moment ago. The cheaper foods are invariably unhealthy. They will not be able to afford micronutrient-rich food. They are unlikely to consume fruits and vegetables because their affordability has come down. Access to our public nutrition programs, the ICDS and MDM, will all be affected because they were being closed. But now, of course, they are active again. And even when schools are closed, the midday meal program is not effective, and therefore some of the children don't have their breakfast or lunch, which they normally used to get from their schools. Communication is again a big issue. People are home locked and they are listening and looking at media, which is giving a panic kind of communication, high amount of negativism, all the wrong kind of foods are advertised. On the contrary, government should make sure that through the media, they should tell people what are the right kind of recipes that they should have or the family should be given during this particular crisis period. There are a whole lot of false claims. Everybody's claiming of immunity boosting, while what we actually need is immunity suppression rather than boosting. If you see the treatment for COVID disease, it is immunosuppressive treatment with steroid than immune boosting. So don't run behind immune boosters. Supplements will not protect us from this disease. There are several unconfirmed traditional remedies which we have no clinical evidence that they help at all. At least if they don't do any harm and provide some nutrients, it's worth taking. The food regulator should make sure that such false claims are not made during this period to mislead the people. The question is, should we recommend mineral or vitamin supplements or immune booster? The answer is no. Supplements are only for people who cannot eat their normal food. Boosting immunity is not saving lives. In fact, suppressing immunity probably is a better source. We have to look at, therefore, anti-inflammatory and immune tolerant kind of products in the nutrition rather than immune boosters. What is likely to be the long-term consequences of any kind of a nutritional imbalance during this period? You may recall the Dutch famine study where during 1 year of undernutrition led to almost a problem of a higher amount of cardiovascular disease 50 years later, because all the mothers who were pregnant during that particular period had children who had fetal undernutrition, which led to a lifelong consequence. So such a consequence is quite likely to happen if children during this period or pregnant women during this period do not have adequate nutrition. The urgent action which needs to be, as recommended by the UNICEF, is to safeguard, promote, and access nutritious, safe, and affordable diets. It is for the community as well as the government to ensure that they help their brethren. Invest in improving maternal and child nutrition through pregnancy, infancy, and early childhood. Reactivate and scale up services for early detection and treatment of childhood wasting. Maintain the provision of nutritious and safe school meals for vulnerable children during this period. And expand social protection to safeguard access to nutritious diet and essential services. You can read the Lancet of August 22nd for more information on these aspects. So this in gist is the overall relationship between nutrition and the COVID epidemic. We still don't have adequate evidence. Many of this is presumptive, but the only evidence certainly is that the overnourished, obese, diabetics, and all those with comorbid conditions are the ones who are most vulnerable. And fortunately, till date, we don't have evidence that the undernourished are vulnerable in this for the disease, though they are vulnerable for other nutritional disorders. Thank you so much for patient hearing. I'll stop sharing my screen. Am I back? Yes.
Thank you, sir. This is Dr. Srividya from DFNS. I welcome you, sir. Nice to have a very beautiful, lucid talk covering almost all aspects which we wanted to know about COVID-19 with special emphasis on nutrition. You have clarified the concepts of innate and adaptive immunity, what is more relevant in the COVID-19 situation. Given the important role of myeloid cells, connected aging and immune function, and also highlighted the new predictors of infection, the role of thymus function. And interestingly, today our conference started with a topic on intermittent fasting, and you have also emphasized on the same of calorie restriction and intermittent fasting being beneficial for immune stimulation, and the role of chronic inflammation and how to mitigate it with some of the good foods as well as micronutrients and the appropriate macronutrient like protein, good quality protein. And you also highlighted the risk due to obesity, the presence of comorbidities like obesity and diabetes. And you also very nicely brought out the point about the role of gut microbiome and the dietary components to maintain the gut microbiome, good microbiome, and the protective role of also some of the natural, not to go for supplements and rather still stick to our traditional and conventional diets. And among the spices, for me, I found that cardamom, you mentioned also cardamom apart from the usual spices that I found as a new information. And of course, about tea catechins. And another thing which you have covered is about stress and sleep, which also becomes a kind of a factors which we need to keep our be alert about. And very nicely, you have also summarized the food security scenario in India, which is of real concern now. As a nutritionist and food or public health people, we need to really worry about this. And very rightly, you put, sir, about the negative effects of media. So, as literate people and as educated people, I think we should discern this and try to put in more of positivism in the media. And in fact, I hope the government takes your advice and start putting what to do, how to handle this in a positive way. And also, you have tried to discern the false claims and about immunity boosters. That is very true, sir. Everything nowadays, you are getting an ice cream with which is being claimed for immunity boosting. You are getting every sorts of products being coming up in the market. And another very important thing as a nutritionist, which I think is relevant, was that you pointed out very nicely the long-term consequences which is going to happen because of this COVID-19, because it's not something which has come for a couple of months and is going away. So it is a policy makers have really take charge of this particular fact, and maybe at our own level we can each one can try to look at this long-term consequence and advice at our own levels in Anganwadi, so wherever we have a scope to do nutrition education. And the need for urgent action and to bring about social protection, I think, was the final point and a very important point which you have made, sir. So overall, it was a very informative and very relevant talk for the day. So before we end, sir, can we just take a few questions from the viewers?
Sure.
So one of the questions they have asked is, what are the keys to healthy aging? Can you give some tips to healthy aging?
In fact, they say that a healthy aging is a God's gift of a disciplined youth. So if you have to age healthy, you should start from your younger age. Eat the right kind of food, be physically active, and try and lead as peaceful and a stress-free life. And then over a period of time, when age actually catches up on us, we'll be healthier. But if we are indisciplined during our youth, we
have to
eat
start
all the
early.
wrong kind of food, then we'll have to suffer when we become old. So there's nothing like healthy aging starts right from the time we are adolescents. Eating the right kind of
Thank you, sir. That was a very important one. Yes. The another question is, what is the role of Giloy roots in this particular COVID condition? Does it have any help, especially with respect to immune?
Sorry, I didn't get
function?
the word. What is the word you said? What's the thing?
Giloy, G-I-L-O-Y, Giloy roots.
G-O-L-O-Y.
Have you
Sorry,
heard of that? I think it's again one of the supplements being propagated.
There are a whole lot of all sorts of vague supplements which
Tinospora.
Tinospora.
Tinospora cordifolia.
Okay, there are traditional
sir.
uses of Tinospora cordifolia, and they say that it has got a role in immunity. But in this particular COVID scenario, we have no evidence with how it is going to benefit.
Okay. Yes. So what about green tea with the honey and cinnamon? That's another question. Whether this combination is good?
As I mentioned, that the catechins have antiviral properties,
Yes.
but they are not going to protect us by drinking green tea. We can't get away. We have to make sure that we take all the safety precautions. And once the virus enters into the body, there's no evidence that green tea is going to reduce the morbidity or anything like that. It is only an assumption that since green tea works in other viral diseases, we assume it's going to work here, but we are not very sure.
But it may have some protection, but not curative.
No.
Sir, what would be your take on what the level or amount of spices to take to have this kind of immunoprotection?
That is, spices are basically an issue of culinary practices, region to region differences, and individual choices. But whatever we do, we see spices. One advantage is you can't take too much of it.
Yes.
So therefore, it has got its own natural limitations, and then to the extent which you can take, it is fine. But there are also people who use spices like kashayams and all that. So that is as per the traditional knowledge it is being used, which could also be helpful, either through food or as a medicinal route or a supplement route.
So one last question, what are the foods to increase the gut microbiome? Of course, you touched upon probiotics and prebiotics.
Yeah.
But if you can just elaborate a little bit, because you are also an expert on that.
Yeah, the gut microbiome actually is improved by taking adequate amount of foods containing dietary fiber, because the dietary fiber is the one which forms the substrate for the good bacteria to grow in our gut. So if we eat a highly refined food which has low fiber, the bacteria will not grow in the gut, and therefore your microbiome will get damaged. Ideal is to take a whole lot of prebiotics. Even onions are got a very good source of prebiotics. Yes. And any fruit, any vegetable or fruit has got a lot of fiber, and that kind of high fiber food should be more than sufficient for a good and healthy gut microbe.
Okay. Thank you, sir. One last question, sir. You are told about cumin and weight loss, because since obesity is a real problem now, any scientific validity for that?
Yes, there are clearly evidences to show that people with higher body fat composition have higher inflammatory cytokines. In fact, one of the tests which are done now to see with the prognostic outcome of patients who have been affected by COVID is to do C-reactive protein. C-reactive protein is actually an inflammatory marker. It has been found that the C-reactive protein levels will be higher in individuals who are overweight and obese and who have diabetes than lean individuals, showing that the higher body fat means higher inflammatory load.
So what is the role of spices like cumin or jeera in this?
The cumin, I understand, will sort of cause satiety much earlier, and therefore cumin containing foods will make you feel full much faster than the one without it. So therefore indirectly reducing your energy intakes.
Okay, thank you, sir. It was a wonderful, very, very wonderful and very informative and apt
You're welcome.
Session of topics. Thank you so much, sir. Actually, we missed you the last year when we had an international conference, and I'm happy we could make it up for that and having you today with us.